To recap everything up to this point, they've said they're going to take all Descendants that are underperforming and move them up to Inez and Freyna. And they're going to take all weapons that are underperforming and move them up to the Last Dagger. I can't read this, so we won't be changing the core skill mechanics themselves, but new passive skills introduced in Season 3 will help improve build variety. To briefly explain this, these passives will be obtained as items that can be equipped like modules. Conjunction, alright. The passive is automatically triggered in conjunction with other active skills. For example, using a projectile type active skill will activate a special effect. While different in design, mutation cells being added to the arcade tuning nodes and may will also provide conditional effects. Example include increasing skill critical hit rate when reloading, or boosting skill range and power for 8 seconds after using a 4th skill. Those are the cubes from Hunt's Post. I think that's what that was in relation to. Cannot be removed with another tuning item. So what is this? This is like defense. This looks like what? Skill power and something? Skill power and MP cost reduction, maybe? These were from, I think this was from a Reddit thing. And then you basically just attach them here. Oh, these go out and around. Okay, I see. They're an extension to where you can, it looks like place additional. I'm wondering if you can just put whatever you want there, because it looks like it's just locked without a picture. We originally distributed blueprints between normal and high risk sectors to prevent delusion of the drop chances, since more available drops can lower the odds of players getting what they want. However, we agree that for veteran players, being able to farm everything in high risk sectors would be a better experience. We'll make an adjustment to them accordingly. So for this, I understand what Jooms is saying. Basically, they split the things up between normal and hard mode to make it to where it was easier to get the items you wanted. But it is kind of annoying to farm low risk over high risk, especially as a seasoned player. I think that there is a solution to this besides diluting the pool, but I don't think they want to do it. And that would be allowing you to like do your target rewards, but do that when you go into the mission. So like when you go into the mission, having it show you like a drop pool, or you being able to pick like one weapon set and one component set that you're trying for, instead of having everything in the pool. I don't know what the best solution here is, but I do understand where Jooms is coming from. And the more items you add, just the more of a pain in the ass it is to farm items. So I don't know that I think that splitting it up into like high risk and low risk is probably the best approach, and that's why they did it. What does the team intend for average players to do on a daily basis in the game? There's tons of stuff. I don't see the rest of the question. The first Descendant is fundamentally structured around farming, so players who haven't completed their gear progression are naturally guided to rotate through the various content. That said, it's true that many players are currently concentrated in in-game activities. We don't have in-game activities, which has led to matchmaking difficulties in mid-tier content. To address this, our goal for Season 3 is to structure gameplay so that players naturally gather around Sigma sectors, void vessels, and the new Axion content. We're also preparing systems similar to the core playlist you suggest, which will help new and returning players progress smoothly towards high-end content. Curious to see what this is. Personally, I believe that it's natural for older content to phase out once it reaches the end of life cycle. And it's ideal for players to regroup around new, better designed content with each season. I think one of the big issues around this is what we've talked about before, in the way that like Final Fantasy XIV does it really well. Final Fantasy XIV does this really well in the sense that it allows new players to still be match made with people to where they don't have a missing matchmaking pool, to where they can get through the new content to be able to start doing the end game content. This just sounds like as players move through, they're just not too worried about this stuff back here, and eventually this stuff back here drops off. I think where you're going to have a problem is what this sounds like is sunsetting. And granted, nobody's paying for the content, so it doesn't matter. But essentially, it sounds like sunsetting content, and that's always very divisive. During the rest of Season 2, Episode 2, we'll proceed with the Void Erosion Purge improvements we've promised at the start of this AMA. We're boldly moving away from the skill attribute meta, instead enhancing skill efficacy to rework this into content all Descendants can participate in together. The new Abyss boss, the Ice Maiden, will also be added. In addition, a new node will be introduced that allows equipping. So this is coming soon, right? Several quality of life features will be improved. A core item conversion system will be added. Presets will be given to inversion reinforcements, as well as the ability to manually rearrange the order. To better support party play, we're also adding a party finder system and to be able to view other Descendants builds. One major improvement, dynamic motion, will also be introduced to this update. I'm assuming that this is going to be this update, but these other things are not. We're also preparing an update for external component cores. This will help strengthen Descendants' defensive capabilities and support skill-based characters to engage more actively in battles. This has never been a problem. I'm curious how this is going to work. There will also be a buff for skill-based Descendants, improvements to movement speed, issues discussed earlier, and balance adjustments for underperforming firearms. In addition, we're preparing a variety of events to keep you engaged while waiting for Season 3. Is all of this coming in Season 2, Episode 2? Are you guys reading this as everything is coming in Season 2, Episode 2? We're preparing, all right. We always aim to bring you more and more polished content to truly deliver fun and satisfaction. That said, we're painfully aware that this still falls short in many areas. We'll do our best to wrap up Season 2, Episode 2 as we prepare with Season 3 for even greater content. Except for the external core components, which is probably later. So you're thinking that we're going to get the Party Finder, the View Descendants, core conversion, inversion reinforcement presets, and mutation cells. Most of it's coming now, like quote unquote now, right? All right, we've received a large number of suggestions related to the movement speed during the recent AMA. While we couldn't respond to every individual question, we gathered the feedback and held a meeting with the relevant teams. As a result, we've decided to review the following areas for potential improvements. Bunny's speed of light skill movement, the maximum sprint speed cap, skills with fixed movement speed increase values. Haley was designed as a Descendant with lower mobility but high damage potential. Instead of removing her movement speed penalty outright, we will first review whether she is performing appropriately within that concept. I mean, right now, like, I get what they're saying, but right now, any of your Descendants that have like a move speed nerf, because the content is like quote unquote so easy, by the time they get there with their move speed nerf, everything is dead. And he plans on evolving characters even more, like some kind of transcendent Descendant for Jaber. So yeah, okay. No, we're not considering a grade above ultimate. While it won't be a grade higher, new passive skills that allow for more diverse build combinations for Descendants will be added to Season 3. I like the idea on this. Hopefully there is a need for it, because right now, in the current difficulty of content, there's no reason to build anything that is not pure offense. When you recently said you take Viessa, Freyna, and Haley as the standard for balancing everyone else, what exactly do you mean? When I mentioned that during the dev live, I was referring to Viessa as a Descendant, who most accurately reflects our intended baseline performance at this time. However, as I stated at the beginning of this AMA, we've decided to narrow the gap between firearm-focused and skill-focused Descendants. With that in mind, we now believe the baseline for skill-based Descendants needs to be raised. Moving forward, we're considering setting higher-performing characters, such as Freyna or Inez, as the new balance reference point for skill dealers. I guess it's good. I don't know. I mean, it just depends on what the new content is. Because if they want higher performing characters such as Freyna or Inez to be the new bar, and the question is, are they setting that bar based on the current content, or are they setting that bar based on these Descendants' powers, but with the new difficult content? Do you see what I mean? That's where this kind of becomes an issue, is we don't actually know. So if they want to make everything as strong as Freyna or Inez, well, is it Freyna and Inez now? Or is it Freyna and Inez versus the harder content? I think if you set everybody at Freyna or Inez, then you're doing a thing where you're setting the difficulty of the all content on the floor. And if you're setting the difficulty of all content on the floor, it's going to be interesting. I just hope we won't see everyone being good at everything. There needs to be a balance between Descendants. I agree. Absolutely. The goal of this improvement is not to erase the uniqueness of each Descendant. Okay. Currently, due to the skill attribution buff in Erosion Purge, Viessa is practically the only skill-based Descendant who can effectively clear stage 30. With these coming update changes, we want to give other Descendants a chance to tackle 30 and use their own abilities and playstyles. That's interesting. I mean, if they can all do it, then ideally everyone's going to be able to do it. It's just VS is going to be able to do it faster, right? We believe that adding rewards to the challenge difficulty of Void Erosion Purge 30 is a topic that requires further discussion within the community. Our cautious stance comes from the concerns that if challenge mode begins to be seen as repeatable farming content, it may lose its intended purpose. I completely understand where they're coming from. Currently, because there's no recurring rewards, players not interested in leaderboards can simply choose to play up to stage 30 freely, while challenge mode remains focused purely on record competition. If rewards were added, players would likely start comparing the time efficiency and expected proportional greater rewards for the higher difficulty, which could eventually make sustaining the mode's difficulty level even more difficult. Again, I completely understand where they're coming from. For those reasons, we intentionally did not set repeatable rewards and challenge difficulty from the beginning. We plan to maintain this design philosophy for now. However, we continue to monitor players' feedback and will reevaluate the change as it becomes necessary. I understand where they're coming from, and I completely get the concept. I think that there does need to probably be some type of reward added to challenge mode. But I think it needs to be things that do not give you intrinsic performance buffs, but rather give you a way to stand out for doing it. Think of like the like tickets you get for running like the Abyss Intercept battles. So if there was a thing where you could get tickets and then turn them in for paints or for cosmetics or for different ways to show off, I think you could do that. Honestly though, I do think that when we've talked about this before, I think the idea of having a leaderboard chase is fine, but I think the limited scope of how many people can get on it make it very dissuasive for a lot of people. So most people are just going to check out and not engage in it. So I think there's definitely a couple different ways to do this. I do think there should be some type of reward, but I think the rewards should not improve you in any way if you want to kind of keep this style to where it doesn't sort of dilute farming in the lower stages. There should be something. I think if you did something here, it would be better than nothing. I think they need to do something there, in my view. Again, I'm nobody, but I think that in my view, they need to do something. I can't read the top part. The goal of this adjustment is to buff underperforming weapons and to bring them closer in power to the last dagger. However, we'll be careful to ensure that no new overpowered weapons end up surpassing the last daggers as a result of this patch. I'm going to be really surprised if they can do this. If they can buff every underperforming weapon up to be exactly on par with the last dagger without going over it, I'll be surprised. I feel like that is such a loaded statement. This is going to be almost impossible to do. If they can successfully do it to where you can grab the last dagger or one of 5 other weapons and they all perform the exact same, I will be very surprised. I also think moving everything up to the last dagger is problematic, but they're obviously taking a no nerf approach right now. To recap everything up to this point, they've said they're going to take all Descendants that are underperforming and move them up to Inez and Freyna. And they're going to take all weapons that are underperforming and move them up to the last dagger.
Drinking out of cups.
So they're going to take all Descendants except for Serena, Inez, and Freyna and make them as strong as Inez and Freyna. And they're going to take every weapon in the game that's not the last dagger and make it as strong as the last dagger, other than ATAMs. ATAMs won't be touched. That's insane. I really hope they can figure something out, but that is going to, I don't want to say the game's cooked, but I do want to say that you are going to create a very interesting situation, because the implication there is that, are you going to move them up to their current power level and then add difficulty on top of it? Or are you going to move everything up to be as strong as those Descendants are in the current content, but with the new content? That's where clarification needs to be done. So during Season 2, Episode 2, the maximum number of arcade tuning points will remain at 40. After the May update, some nodes will need to be adjusted to make use of the new socketing nodes. In the long term, there is a possibility the Arche tuning level and maximum points will be increased. So basically, it sounds like they're going to take some of the other nodes, probably the gold nodes that require, like, have a cost of 5, and maybe reduce the cost of those so you have more points to move around the board. I would say either 3 or 1, depending on how much additional cost. Like, depending on how important the other gold nodes are. I would say 3 is probably a safe assumption. I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't just take it down to 1. Is Season 3 finally bringing real gameplay depth to the Colossus fights? Are we just getting another round of Colossus fights that feel like opening a loot box? God damn, this dude went hard. To ensure field Colossus fights in Season 3 don't feel like one-shot loot boxes, we've already announced plans to narrow the gap. Am I dumb? Hold on, let me finish reading this. In Axiom, the new region arriving in Season 3, we're preparing several features aimed at delivering more in-depth combat. One such feature is the introduction of special monsters that appear randomly during missions. These enemies are larger than normal foes and have unique patterns, encouraging more strategic gameplay. Since the first Descendant is a farming game, it should be enjoyed both solo and in groups. Most content is designed to be able to be played without relying on support characters. As a result, we believe supporting Descendants also need the ability to contribute as damage dealers, enabled through Transcendent mods, though their efficiency should still be lowered than other DPS characters. That's true. That said, we're working on expanding in-game content to a more diverse range of experiences. This includes solo-friendly content, party-oriented missions where support characters can shine, as well as content specifically designed for skill-based and firearm-based Descendants. My brain. These are good things. It sounds like they're planning on trying to make a change to party-oriented missions and things like that. But this doesn't make this. I think there's got to be a translation issue here, because the idea here is like, in Season 3, is Season 3 finally bringing real gameplay depth to the Colossus fights, or are we just getting another round of Colossus fights that feel like opening a loot box? To ensure that field Colossus fights in Season 3 don't feel like one-shot loot boxes, we're going to make skill-based Descendants stronger. Where does that doesn't answer the problem. You're already one-shotting them with firearms. So now you're going to be able to one-shot them with firearms or one-shot them with skill Descendants. So they can bump up the difficulty without screwing over skill Descendants. You could read it that way if you read between the lines. But that doesn't really address the problem. That if you're saying, because right here, you're not saying that the firearm Descendants are a problem. No, I don't think it's a ChatGPT error. I think what Benji's saying is like kind of on par with what the intended like sentence here is supposed to be. But the way I read it, in order to not make them feel like one-shot loot boxes, we're going to make skill Descendants stronger. Do you see what I mean? Like, if you read this as words, that's what it says. I know that's not what it means, though. I think what it means is something more along the lines of what Benji is saying, which is they're going to narrow this gap to where this isn't so prominent. It says in deep combat, so it doesn't matter who shines. What do you mean? In Axiom, the new region arriving Season 3, we're planning on several features aimed at delivering more in-depth combat. Yeah, I just, like I said, this line does not fix this. This line fixes this maybe, but this does not fix this. Making these guys as strong as these guys doesn't prevent this problem from happening. This could prevent this problem from happening. MP recovery out of combat and MP recovery in combat stats are currently separated because they're treated as distinct attributes, which makes sense. While unifying them may be more intuitive, it's not something we can implement immediately. I don't think you should. I think that it's fine to have MP recovery out of combat and MP recovery in combat as two different. I don't necessarily feel that this causes a problem, but I can't read the original comment. But I feel like when you're in combat, your MP recovery intuitively in most games just recovers slower. As for buffs and debuffs in Void Erosion Purge, that information can be shared. We acknowledge that attempting to resolve class balance through content-specific buffs and debuffs was a fundamental misstep. Unfortunately, I don't have the context for this. Since Void Erosion Purge was built around that concept, we can't fully overhaul it. But in the May update, we plan to abolish the skill attribute meta and improve skill efficacy so that Descendants can participate efficiently regardless of type. We will review displaying the buff debuff information in the UI after these implement. Going forward, do not intend to use content-based buffs and debuffs to manage class balance. That's interesting. I feel like, talking about the hidden buffs that Vash discovered, I don't think they should have ever been hidden, but I don't think that it's a problem that you use them. No, I see what you're saying. My bewildering look wasn't that I didn't understand the context of what was being said. I don't understand the idea that they will not use content-based buffs and debuffs to manage class balance and by and large challenge. Like, if they're just saying they won't debuff things or buff things to make only skill descendants good or only weapon descendants good, then like, fine, whatever. I don't think you should take this tool out of your toolbox, because I don't think that that was a problem. I think the implementation of it was a problem. I don't think making Void Erosion Purge weapon-based descendants was a problem. I think making the last 5 levels weapon-based descendants was a problem. Because for the first 25 levels, you had built your descendants up to use skills. And then once they were built up to use skills, they were made inefficient. So, and then the last 5 levels was only made to use guns. And I think that was the misstep. I think if you would have said you needed to use skill-based descendants to get the weapon cores so you could upgrade your guns to where you could go do X content, or you could go do content X with gun-based descendants to make them more viable or to like add additional damage, would have been fine. But the implementation of doing it in the last 5 levels felt like a misstep to me. And now saying that you will not use that tool again is a problem to me, because I think that you can very effectively look at some content and say, hey, this area for this gameplay mode or whatever is has like very oppressive Arche or something, and it makes weapons less effective. And then in that entire zone, weapons are less effective, and it creates a gameplay loop that incentivizes using skill-based descendants. As long as you know that going in with clear UI indicators before you load in, and it doesn't change halfway through. Maybe I'm retarded, and you guys tell me if I'm like way off base. But as a gamer, I don't mind having to like change up how I do things or try different things, as long as I know what's going on. But it's when you change in midstream that you start to make people mad. I think that where the problem in Purge was that you didn't know about it the whole time and then it was hidden. I think if you knew about it the whole time going into it, you wouldn't really care. Some people just want to play whatever they want or use one character to play everything, Kuro, and I get that. I think that you should make some content like that, but I think that you need to have some level of content that has some type of challenge to it. Not all content. And I think there should be a level of accessibility, which is like why you need multiple tiers of difficulty. So like you can do the base level of content with whatever you want, however you want, but then over time there needs to be additional difficulty added through either players skilling themselves up and learning mechanics and learning how to do things, or by like having minimum power levels required to do things. Because while I understand like Kuro's point where some people just want to be able to do whatever they want with whatever they want, I think that you have to have some sort of barrier to make it to where, because you have to extend that to a point, right? So, because if you follow that logic, some players just want to be able to play with whatever they want or use one character to play everything. Okay, well, I want to use a 0 catalyst non-ultimate bunny to be able to do Void 35. Now, you can look at me and go, well, Judge, you're being unreasonable. That's fucking dumb. You're retarded. Like, you could tell me that, but that's following that same train of logic. So at what point do you cut off being able to do everything with whatever you want? Like, at some point, there is a cutoff line. And defining that cutoff line is the important part. And that cutoff line has to be well established. Because what I just said is a fair counter argument to somebody that says, well, I just want to be able to do whatever with whatever. You can just say, okay, well, that's what I want to do. And then if somebody's like, well, you're being unreasonable, it's like, am I? Because the flip side of that coin is I can say that you're being unreasonable by saying that you want to be able to do it with an ultimate bunny with 6 catalysts and 30% or like 30 points on your arcade tree and a couple new components.